Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Hello, hello, Ask.
Hello, hello.
Aska. That's what most of my family calls you.
I like it.
Yeah, of course. It's our Jamaican patois pronunciation of your name, Oscar.
It's good rolling.
I try. All right, here we are back for another Miosk episode. They're becoming quite infamous or infamous, as they say.
Where's that from? If you don't know, look it up.
If you know, you know. All right. Today is one of those episodes where you and I sit down and we catch up because we see so little of one another.
Right.
I mean, what, 22 hours of the day? 7
Maybe.
days a week? Some people might find that to be stifling, but not us.
Not me, for sure.
In any case, what are we talking about today?
Well, I have my list of notes.
All right, let's do it. Miosk away.
This is something that maybe I need to stop subscribing to so many newsletters, but there's this guy named Sahil Bloom, and I saw this. He's like, here's a piece of advice. And I was like, oh, this is Mimi. And he said, dive through cracked doors. If someone cracks open a door that may present an opportunity, dive right through it. That's you in a nutshell.
The diving part, or just because there's an opportunity?
Both. Whereas I look at a cracked door with an opportunity and I'm like, let me think about it.
What happens if the door closes?
Then it wasn't meant to be.
And therein lies the difference between Oscar and I. And I think neither are wrong, right? I think it's a matter of maybe I dive too often.
Right.
Too hard.
Sometimes the diving can cause a head trauma.
I think that's interesting because I really feel like I've been making a conscientious, is that the word? Or a conscious, a very intentional effort to dive through less cracked doors, to use your metaphor. But basically, I think that what happens is I do assess. So it's not like every opportunity that comes along, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. However, the ones that do come along that I feel are beneficial or would be a really good one, then yes, you're right. I definitely dive in.
Right.
But I don't know that I see that as problematic.
I didn't say it was. I'm just saying it made me think of you.
Sometimes Oscar will say over breakfast or something, so I looked up this newsletter or I was reading this and this sounds like you. This is you. Spot on. This is you. And I think that's kind of funny that I feel like I'm very easily defined in a lot of these metaphors or quick things where sometimes you read these philosophy things and you're like, this sounds like you. Or maybe Oscar just always thinks about me.
I think that's what it is. So another thing I was thinking about is this process of learning. And this I really just like because this can come with Kung Fu history, a challenging subject. Ryan Holiday, who wrote a lot and still writes a lot on Stoicism and a podcast and multiple books and a whole catalog on Stoicism. He said this when you're learning some things, there's this process. And the process is, or his idea is simple, complicated, simple. And the example he used was, when you first learn about the Civil War, you think, oh, this is about slavery. That's it. And then you do a little bit more research and you're like thinking, you know what, it's a little more complicated than slavery because you've done some research. You've done a little bit of YouTube University or you've listened to a podcast or something.
Right. You're like, well, there's politics involved and there's legislative work and Congress and all there's all these things or whatever.
And then when you really learn about it, you realize, oh shit, this was absolutely just about slavery. It was as simple as...
So it's like coming full circle a lot of times.
And so that process is a lot with Kung Fu, where you think, as a beginner, you see things like, okay, I just need to start training, I need to focus on the basics. Your teachers tell you, hey, don't worry about it, just focus on the basics. We have a new student come in and we say, hey, most important thing is the basics. And then after a little bit of training, could be a year or two, they gain a little bit of knowledge. They're like, oh, I've got to start now. You make it more complicated. Now you start adding all these different variables. Mm-hmm. Then you spend years in that realm and you become a little bit more knowledgeable. And then you go back and go, oh, no, it really is but it's mainly about the basics.
Yeah.
That's how important it is. So that circle, one, I really like his analogy on the Civil War and slavery because it's very prescient, right? Like, but two, it just always, a lot of the things make me think about our day-to-day lives and just common experiences as teachers and coaches. Is like, we keep saying the same thing, and then students have to find their own path, their own journey. And I've had to find that myself. And I still overcomplicate things and then realize, no, wait, it's actually really just about these basics that will make everything better.
Yeah, I love this because it really applies to so many things. Like anything can be plugged in here. Learning to play the guitar or learning to be a better soccer player. I bet all of those apply. Now, I do neither of those things. However, I have spoken to people who are experts in their fields, and I feel like these principles just are kind of universal. But in reference to Kung Fu, what's really interesting is, especially as a young Sifu, I really think I tried to overcomplicate things, and even just the basics. I tried, okay, how am I going to make the basics harder or more challenging? And it's kind of interesting because as an advanced student, I think that's something that they need to actually learn to do for themselves. Because when we go to advanced class, so from our Wah Lum program, in reference for that, like basically there's a beginner, program where they're just learning what to do in the first month or so. And then there's kind of a beginner intermediate class, which is our general population class. And everyone's kind of there, but they learn according to their own skill. But it's kind of a Gen Pop class, right? And then there's the quote unquote advanced class, which is mainly instructors and people who have been there a long time that aren't so intimidated by me that they're okay to attending the class. I feel like a big barrier for that is my personality and people's want to be near me. But unlike you, who just wants to be around me all the time. But I think that it's interesting because they'll come from this class that maybe they've been in for 4 or 5 years. And, oh man, I'm going to the advanced class. We're going to be doing crazy stuff. We're going to be doing jump kicks, combinations, and sweeping and rolling and flipping around, or, using all the weapons. And like 45 minutes in, it was like, oh yeah, we just finished the basics. Right. And I think that can be frustrating for a lot of people that don't have the frame of reference of understanding that the foundation and the basics, revisiting that becomes complicated, actually. So it's like, where in that simple, complicated, simple do we really get back to simple? Because to me, that end, oh yeah, we're back at the basics, is actually complicated, because I feel like, especially for us as martial artists, when we are aging, you and I do a segment called 40 Fit Fu, which in a few years it's going to be 50 Fit Fu. Right. So I'll get there before he does. But I think we'll have a name change coming soon for those episodes, which, tangent, but you've been doing 2.0 on that. Right. And basically doing really quick, amazing recaps so people can go, oh, wait, I'm actually really interested in this. I can go back and watch one of 100 episodes or something? 100 plus episodes. 100 plus episodes. We really were dedicated for a while there. So, but to get back to my point is like, oh, as aging or changed bodies and adjustments, not just for injury, but maybe you're more powerful because you're stronger. You know how to harness your chi. You know how to do your endurance. Like, aging doesn't mean decrepit and debilitated, that you're going downhill. Like, to me, we always say this, it feels like a broken record, but we use Grandmaster Chan as our number one example of, you don't have to let age prevent you from moving better, smarter, or more impressively even, right? I think we speak about it all the time where my dad really just started coming into the profession in his 30s,
Right.
maybe even 40s, right? So that was like the start. And I think he was really peaking out in his late 60s, 70s, was watching his videos. Like he had, of course, this vibrance and energy as a young, quote unquote, young 30, right? Like a younger performer. I can only imagine as a 20-something what he was like physically on those ships.
Right.
You know, where he told us, we go on cruises all the time. And I used to run up the rope there from the shore pier anchor, not anchor, but where they tie the ropes all the way up to the ships. He goes, oh yeah, I would run up and down those all the time, like an animal, like a cat or something. And you and I recently put out our slack line and just holding on and standing on that slack line. So I'm just thinking, wow, you know, we've seen something like that done. But so we can only imagine the prowess of someone in their 20s. But as he became seasoned and knew his body and knew the movement and had done all of the basics and the repetition for that much longer, it made him even more impressive. And so that's my hope. Yes, we do fight things, but I think he didn't sit down in chairs as much as I do, right? He didn't get on the computer and do all these other things. So like he was able to just continuously train his body. But I feel like that simple, complicated, simple, like we come back to the simple, but it is actually complicated because we take what we know and we just keep going deeper and then we make it not complicated, but we make it like more intense or more challenging. And so there is this amazing thing where we're like, okay, don't make it so complicated. Be simple about it. It is just what we did in the beginning, but now we're doing it better. And now we're doing it with more knowledge and stuff. So it's interesting to see. And the really successful martial artists, at least in Chinese Kung Fu, and in particular Wah Lum, are the ones that understand this concept and aren't in advanced class going, why are we doing Bai Fu Cao for 20 minutes? I'm bored, right? I don't know that anyone's ever said that to me, but I know that they think it, right? But I think the ones that are successful in actually excelling in this art form and improving are the ones that really take to heart that we need to get back to the simple at the end of, leaving that middle section of complicated.
Yeah, the simple is still simple, and what we always say is simple, not necessarily easy. You just have your experience adds a lot more depth to things that are simple and maybe allows you to hone in. And the writer Anne Lamont was recently speaking to Adam Grant and talking about the process of learning stuff. And she said, well, maybe the secret is left foot, one foot in front of the other. But she said maybe the secret is, okay, left foot, left foot, breathe. Because you got to remember to take a breath, because the point is, you want to make it not necessarily as like, okay, how can I not try harder, but how can I resist less, right? Because maybe that's the case. When you try to make things harder, that's when you're complicating things. But when you're resisting less, maybe you can go deeper into the simple things, into the basic things, and they become deeper and richer.
I love this because one, the literal word resistance is, I feel, such a huge blockage to learning. And it's like that image of, someone pulling a mule that's just sitting on their hind legs and just like doesn't want to go anywhere, even though you're trying to pull them to success. And their idea of success is not clear yet and what's needed. Or, we talk about this all the time as teachers. Is it because they don't trust you as teachers that they have a resistance, right? Like, so what causes that resistance? Is it time, resources, et cetera, or is it just like that mindset?
Right.
And I think it's not just a resistant mindset, but I think this is, we go back to this all the time, but the concept of a sifu is you are in a family at this point. Like in traditional Chinese Kung Fu, you call each other by sibling names. Like, you're my older Kung Fu brother, younger Kung Fu brother. You're my older Kung Fu sister, younger Kung Fu sister. Everyone. Like at our school, the teachers, quote unquote, the assistants are given, a title out of respect so that the students can look up to them and be reminded of that in that verbiage. Like, I don't believe in titles for the sake of titles. I don't believe in being called Sifu just because, oh, I'm a Sifu and I have a certificate. No, it's because every time a student says, Sifu so-and-so or Sije or Siheng so-and-so, it reminds them, like, I am carrying on this respect and tradition, and it puts you in a mindset to learn. That's why in school, I really believe in addressing your professors and everything in a way, because I think that already that's a starting point to set the tone of being more open to learning. And in traditional Chinese Kung Fu, it's really important to have that relationship of learning. And I think that when we go to the resistance part of students or even as teachers can also be resistant to wanting to teach more. But I think that there's a lack of trust in the process or in the people. And that, I think, is the biggest barrier to improvement and to really excelling in something that you want to learn. And I think that goes for anything, not just Kung Fu, but in particular Kung Fu. I feel like that's super key. And I always talk to you about, like, why is there so much resistance in my life? And it feels that way, especially when you have such a clear vision. And to me, in my mind, I have a clear vision. Whether I am tackling legislative work, whether I am tackling a performance, whether I am tackling a class, or how I want all the classes to be run at the school, or how I want the entire Wah Lum system, to operate as one familial unit that is teaching and with the same mission statement, with the same goals, and giving the same quality. Like, I have a really clear vision. And when things don't go my way, I feel like there's just so much resistance and I get very frustrated. And that goes all the way down to something as simple as, hey, I'm teaching this class and the student is just resistant.
Yeah, so the resistant part makes sense, and then tying it into keeping things simple, and also the martial art etiquette is that I learned a lot of this from consistently listening to a lot of things from Jocko Willink and reading his book, because I feel at it a lot, is the frustration that we get is because we didn't communicate our vision as clearly. Mm-hmm. So to use an example of like a class where I taught.
And you're talking about Extreme Ownership, just for our...
Extreme Ownership is his book, one of many books, but also he just speaks on leadership all the time. And one theme that keeps coming around is like, well, ultimately it's your fault, right? But that you didn't communicate things clearly. Now, in the martial arts setting, you can't just be like, oh, okay, let me now cater to your feelings and take 20 minutes to explain my vision. But if we're frustrated, and I've been there as a teacher and frustrated, then I should have, before getting frustrated, go, wait, did I really communicate this clearly? Do I have some place that I can point to them where they understand this vision? So it could be even something as simple as like, okay, you know what? I apologize if if you misunderstood what the reason is. I actually just recorded a podcast on this, so I'm going to direct that to you, and then you leave your frustration behind, which is hard to do. And then if the student still keeps coming, it's like, okay, you know what? I apologize. I guess I wasn't clear last time. Then things can start escalating, but unfortunately, we sometimes just get frustrated for the resistance. It's not that it's not valid. It's just that I know this because I fail at it, but I just know that it's not worth it. So I just need to constantly be thinking, well, okay, now what do I need to do then? Maybe I need to record this podcast with you where we talk about it. Maybe I need to write an email to the students. Maybe I need to record a short 2-minute video that I can direct them to. And we try doing these things, but trying to make then that message as simple as possible. So your vision is very clear to you, but then the job of a leader is then to distill that vision as clearly, as concisely as possible, so that the members that are part of your organization, whether they're students or whatnot, then understand your vision and decide for themselves, okay, I'm down with this vision or not. Because then you can ask that question like, are you clear with what our vision is? If not, let me make it clear for you. Now are you clear? Cool. Now do you understand? And if they go, you know what, I do understand your vision and it's not my vision, then at least there can be a parting of ways with understanding as opposed to just constant frustration.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think definitely in the past, it is also something I failed at. I think I spoke with Coach Dan John about this on my podcast as well, in terms of, I think it was where we were talking about rote memory, but we were also talking about coaching and like tic-tac-toe and how things change, and being able to just ensure people are listening. And one of the things that has been really helpful is asking them to repeat back what I just said.
Yeah.
Or like, hey, okay, so please let me know if I'm communicating clearly, because what we have here is a failure to communicate. And so it's been interesting to hear back, or have another student share. I'm like, hey, they just came in late. Why don't you tell them what we just went over? And then to hear the telephone game thing, but like to hear them explain it and go, oh, okay, wow, I guess I am not speaking English or not clear. But I also feel like one of the ever constant and always to be challenging characteristics of being a Sifu or coach or teacher is that you're just going to end up having to repeat yourself a million times, because ultimately people have not been trained to be good listeners, especially now with how much distraction there is. So I feel like I think I'm just doomed to have to repeat myself all the time.
I don't disagree. I guess my thought is, how can I prevent myself from being frustrated?
Yeah.
Because I have gotten in the past few weeks, very, very frustrated sometimes.
Yeah.
And my first instinct is always like to blame the stupidity of the person that I was speaking to. When really it's just, okay, one, I shouldn't be getting as frustrated. And two, like, okay, I obviously didn't make things as clearly. And I do need to understand that repeating is part of it. So that's fine. And the other thing is, you mentioned about like the titles part, of being in the school and being like, oh, you're a Sifu or not. It's just, maybe some people don't understand. So we were talking to a former student who came to visit the temple to buy some stuff. He's doing Muay Thai now. And he was thanking us for the tradition, how much he missed the traditional part of it. And that it's not just that we do the basics consistently and we focus, but it's okay, we're going to bow into the altar. Okay, we address our instructors as Sifus or Sihings. I mean, if you are in a Chinese culture, you don't call your older sister, like if you were my older sister, I wouldn't be like Mimi, I'd be like JJ, or
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
call you by your name. I call
Yes.
you give, and that's just part of it. And it's not like you're giving them a title because they're to boost their ego.
Yes.
It's just because that's part of the culture.
It is part of the culture,
And,
yeah. I think that's hard for people too, right? To learn other cultures and to not just learn about it, like, oh, that's what you do, but also then to have to apply it. If it's so foreign to you, it's
right.
challenging.
And there's a part of like where, again, if the communication isn't clear, it can seem and people can assume that like, oh, they just want this title because of the ego.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas more of like, well, we're really trying to propagate this traditional style, and that's part of it. And it doesn't even have to be part of the martial arts part. Like, for example, one of the greatest wrestling coaches of all time, Dan Gable, when he had his wrestlers about to train, they're about to step on the mat, he had them bow. It's like, boom, light switch is on. And so you can carry forth traditions that, to your point, kind of turn on the switch, would go, oh, wait, I am now in a environment of learning, or now I'm in a traditional environment, so all these things can be applied not just in the martial arts. You can use them for other things.
Yeah, I like that whole respect the mat, respect the training hall, respect the school, respect the space. And it, even in the home, I'm really trying to be better about, like, in the place in which I sleep, because I have sleep issues, right? And I've talked about this, but in the place in which I sleep, I try never to do any work, because I want to keep that area clear from that, right? So I have to have my workspace. I want to have my gym space. And I kind of, not that you have to compartmentalize everything in your life, but I feel like there is a respect and intention when you create space. So we kind of talk about not watching TV in the room and things like that. So you can really honor that space for sleep. And it's one of the sleep hygiene things. And I'm not an expert in that. There's a lot of really smart people that go over why it should be dark or cool and temperatures and but also the electronics and everything like that. So I think that applies, like you said, when you're doing wrestling and you respect the mat and you do kind of a traditional thing. I think knowing your space in which the intention of what you're about to do is important. And that's why at the temple too, we don't just bow to the ancestors to respect before coming in, but it's also we're respecting our training space. And that's why we ask people to bow in and out. If they need to grab a drink of water because it's 100 degrees in Florida, we're not asking people to pass out, but we are asking you to respect the training space, because I do think there is a little switch that goes on and in just that movement, right? And just that quick gesture of gratitude and respect. And I think that is not necessarily always a part of people's everyday lives, unless they're very intentional about meditation or having mindfulness time or whatever that you honor or call it for yourself. But I think it's interesting because I do find not just the culture and the tradition of it important, but I find that ensuring students do that does something to open them better, prepare them for learning. I think it's like primer, right? It's like at least we know we know what we're about to do, even if you've had a long day. I think it's one extra thing to put us one step further into being able to be better learners.
Yeah, right. I guess you have to define what your goal is, right? If this is like, oh, I want to be better at this thing. So, the iPhone revolution and all that came 2007.
Yeah.
So in 3 years, that'll be 20 years, right, of it. And with all of the distractions that it came with, we keep adding more things. So it's back to the simple, complicated, simple. So we know deep down, okay, if I want to pursue and be good at something, I need to focus on this stuff, but we keep adding to it. So even something as an example of strength training. So we have this space here. I love listening to music when I work out, but there are times where I'm like, I've listened to music or I'm listening to a podcast and I'm working out because I'm doing both. But recently in this year, and this is from reading Acts, this new program from Pavel Satzlin, and he's written about this as well, is like, if you're really into your strength training, you're going to respect that space, which means no music, nothing else to distract you. And there have been times where I'm like, oh, I'm going to turn my phone off. All I have is my timer set, and then I'm just focusing on the workout. And you do feel better and more accomplished when you do that. But the itch of like, wait, let me get my curated playlist that'll hype me up at the right time. Or wait, while I'm working out, I should also be listening to this because I have a list of all these audiobooks to listen to. So just knowing that it's not that it's bad, because you can take all of that as a positive thing. But if you eliminate and make things more simple, right? And to what we said earlier, like resist less, or I read it on James Clear's blog post, but I don't think he wrote it, but I think he put it on there, which was like, the amateur does not know what to do, but the master knows what not to do, right? And that goes back to that simplicity part. It's just like, what are the things that I can eliminate? In one of those conversations about Eastern and Western philosophy, like there's this thing on the Western philosophy that you're born and then you got to work to achieve. And in the Eastern philosophy, it's more like you're born pretty much perfectly, but you start accumulating stuff and you need to learn how to like let things go to achieve whatever level that you want to reach. So whether it's martial arts or strength training or, whatever it is that you're trying to learn, is trying to look at it as like, okay, what is it that I need to do less of to get to my goal? And it's really hard. It's really hard because if you're someone who enjoys learning and living in this world, you're going to get bombarded by a ton of information.
Yeah, I find it interesting because I feel like the Wah Lum Temple in particular, like there are traditional Chinese martial arts, and this is in no way putting us above others, right? And then there's Wah Lum Kung Fu, like you at the temple in particular, right? You don't walk in. First you drive in to this compound, we call it, right? Where there's this huge, great wall of Wah Lum surrounding us with, now we have all this beautiful artwork of the lions and dragons and our own version of our Kung Fu Panda. And it's just, you're driving into a very unusual place. And we kind of teased about it because this week we actually had a lot of visitors from out of town. People are traveling already, pre-summer. And we're kind of the families go to Disney World, martial arts families go to Disney World and make sure they stop to the Wah Lum Temple before or after that trip, right? Like it's the Orlando itinerary. It's very popular where people want to, and it's not just Wah Lum students, people from all over the world come. And so you enter this place that's a little bit mystical and magical, and it's not just your average martial arts school that is in a other building with other businesses around. Like you're really this standalone. And so it's you drive in and there's this bamboo, there's several buildings, there's a cultural center, and then you drive up to literally a Chinese kung fu temple in the middle of Orlando, which is now insanely crazy busy. There's construction, it's kind of disruptive, but it's kind of nice because once you're on the inside of it, you do tend to feel that peel away. So we not only say, oh, okay, respect the mat, respect the space, but like we've also created this environment that is so unique, I think. And, that is the vision of Grandmaster Chan, is saying, okay, I want to have this place. But I think it's just such a cool thing to be able to enter somewhere. And it's like, if you can't get in the mood to do Kung Fu at the Wah Lum Temple, I don't know where you can, right? You really... One episode, you and I did a Kung Fu we did a full episode at the temple about the sounds of the temple, right? And it was a little crazy though, because there was some traffic going by that in the distance, you could hear it. We were out by the beautiful fish gate that Sifu Leroy built for us. And we just kind of walked around and we talked about the sensory experience. So if you go in, there's visual already, right? You're looking with your eyes. And then you start to hear Kung Fu. If you go at a certain time of day, you can hear classes going on. And there's a specific count. And there is specific sounds that martial artists make. And then, I don't know if the smell is something that we want to really recapture, but there is the smell of the Kung Fu school before and after class, right? There's a specific thing. It can get pretty sweaty, but even outside, there's like the bamboo, there's so much nature. And then, you're there and the floor is really specific, like what we feel, the weaponry, and just even sitting outside and stretching. We have a lot of wood and just, it's like we're really hitting up all of the senses, right? Like it's kind of an interesting thing. And I think taste might be the only one, because we don't really eat there. We do eat like after shows and things like that. But I will tell you, back in the day when Grandmaster Chan would be cooking during that morning class, people would be smelling his food and you could taste what you were smelling. You're like, oh, he's making that chicken, that special soy sauce chicken, and some people who maybe stayed to help clean or do something special would get to eat it. So it's like we really have been able to create a sensory experience at the Wah Lum Temple that I think is really unique. And anybody who's been through there for whatever reason, I think has at least experienced 4 out of the 5 senses all at once, right? That I would say taste might be the only one that not everybody has experienced, but I think it's really interesting that I just actually finished reading this book about the 5 senses, and I'm failing because I don't have the name of it right in front of me, but it basically was like kind of having appreciation for all those things and how different we see the world when we're kind of focusing. And I know there's a lot of meditation on that too. Like, okay, let's close our eyes. Suddenly our sound, what we hear, auditory is much more heightened. But I think we forget how much is happening just when you drive into the temple and you walk up to the temple and then your experience at the class and then you're leaving the class, like how much of our senses are heightened from the different things that we do there.
Right. I think as long as you're paying attention.
Right. And yeah, I think even if you're not paying attention, you're hearing and seeing something, right? I think even it's almost like impossible not to be hit with something while you're there. And again, I think we've done the best job we can to create the environment that is conducive and the best what we think we can be for now for learning, minus those mosquitoes. Like, audience, if you have a magical way to rid the temple of mosquitoes and squirrels forever, I know there's a lot of squirrel lovers out there, but they have done a lot of damage to our property. And so you can take them. Please come and take them. But I think we've done a really amazing job of at least providing that, right? And then we try to do the second amazing thing, which is the best instruction possible. We constantly are meeting and talking about it. And so, yes, like we're accountable. Like if students aren't learning, that we have to figure out what we're doing wrong. But at the same time, students have to show up and they've got to do the work and they have to be open to learning, and their mind has to be open to it and open to the culture, because we do things very traditionally.
Right. There's another aspect to it, which is with the learning process. Because again, Adam Grant speaking, he was asked a question of like, well, because you're a psychologist, what do you do when you're stuck? And he said, well, and he had to answer in one sentence. It was a rapid fire question. He goes, what do I do when I'm stuck? I remind myself that very few creative ideas come from forced effort, which is really smart, because, you do have to work hard, but sometimes when you you're pushing, or you're resisting, to use your word. Sometimes when you're resisting, you're not going to get anywhere. But there's that part. And then the other thing I was thinking about is something Mike Boyle said when we met with him 10 years ago, which is, in fitness, the pendulum swings. Mm-hmm. A new fad starts and it just goes, and then eventually it'll come back to the middle. And I think one of the things, not to make Wah Lum Kung Fu the center, but with martial arts, and things swing, pendulum swing. Oh, this is really popular now. This is really popular now. And for our style for Kung Fu, we're trying to say we're traditional Chinese martial arts styles. Some people have left the style and it's like, okay, we're no longer going to be doing sifus. We're not going to do any titles. We're going to do color belt system. So it swings to a more non-traditional. And then I'm sure that there's people who take it and go, we need to be more traditional. We're not just going to bow to the altar. We're going to bow left, right, center. We're going to
train in the woods for a week. No electricity.
Right. The sifu now will have a throne to sit in. All these different little things. So I think the pendulum can kind of swing. Hopefully we're making the conscious effort to keep to what is traditional and not go too deep down the rabbit hole, and make it a little bit more accessible for people. And time will tell if we're doing the right thing. I do know that from people who continuously come back to visit, and they mostly recall fond memories.
Yeah, thank goodness. I'm waiting for some stories where students come back and say, I've had nightmares about you for 25 years and here's my therapy bill. But I feel like I just did an episode not long ago on Coach Dan John's newsletter phrase, which I stole and thought it was a really great jumping off point. So I'm not going to belabor that here on you are not good enough to be frustrated. And it certainly applies to coaches as well as students on like, what are we doing? Are we doing enough? Mm-hmm. And are we good enough to be frustrated? And have we done everything? And have we explored all of the avenues? And we talk about extreme ownership so much, and that can get like to the extreme. Like, okay, if we're accountable for everything, then everything we do is always going to be wrong. Like we can't take it to that extreme. But I think knowing that, are we good enough to be frustrated? And I'm feeling pretty confident in my life at this point, where I try to be reflective. I try to make sure that I'm grateful and look and go, okay, all right, I think in this area I can be frustrated. Maybe not here yet. I can be frustrated, right? And not that we want to be frustrated, but it's like, what have we earned the right to not complain about, but to say, wow, we've really put forth all we could on this. And it just didn't work out, because it won't always work out, right? And for students, I urge you to go back and listen to that podcast episode, because I don't want it to come off as a lecture so much as, have you asked yourself the question, are you good enough to be frustrated? And I love Dan John for being able to articulate it so well in his Wandering Weights newsletter, but also to remind us, like, it's just, I thought it really... you sent it to me, of course. You're like, oh, this is a good one. We should talk about this. And it was something that also I think I tied into a previous solo podcast, which was about like Dita Jiao, social justice work, and like, who are we as people and as martial artists. So I think it's been a really fascinating journey to teach all the way from the 90s to now, because people have changed and the world has changed. And therefore, yes, we are still the Wah Lum Temple, people are surprised. Oh, wait, you still do that every day? You still do those basics? You say the same things? Oh, wow, you're wearing the same uniform. Like, I'll say in the 80s, we had a lot of different colorful t-shirts. Like we still had a traditional belt system. I'm just saying we had a little more neon 80s flair as the horrible fashion of the 80s goes. Wah Lum also went there. But essentially the logo is the same, right? And so I think we do a great job of the content is the same, but the way in which we have to approach teaching people has had to adjust because people are so different.
Yeah. There's a thing, this is again, the writer Anne Lamont who wrote Bird by Bird.
Bird by Bird.
Right. She was asked, because, in Kung Fu, right, to be a teacher, you have to be a practitioner first, right?
Yes.
So she was asked, well, you're not just a writer, you're also a writing teacher. So this person asked, well, what's similar and different about the satisfaction that comes from producing creative work yourself, and then the satisfaction that you get when you help someone else get their creative work? And her answer was just awesome. It was she started talking about how she got sober when she was 32, which was almost 38 years ago, and all she wanted to do was to get well. And that was the main thing that she cared about. And then she wanted to live in a way that was gentler, more giving. But then after some time, maybe years later, she realized that the gift was really when other people were healing. And so she thinks it's the same with teaching and writing. What she loves is to watch other writers get really good. That may come with being older. It's the gift of watching other people bloom. And I can't have it if I'm not tending to my own garden, is what she says. So you still have to be, and her point is like, you still got to be writing, but there's this amazing thing of watching other people bloom. Mm-hmm. I feel for myself, I'm not old enough yet as a teacher to always be loving that all the time, because I'm really concerned about trying to improve myself. But there has to be this balance, right? Which is, as a teacher and a practitioner, you have to tend to your garden, you need to still do your work, but then you really do get a ton of satisfaction when you see your students like get better. And Master Chan always said this, is like, you need to be better than me. No one is better than him, unfortunately. But he always said that, at yearly events and gatherings. He's like, I'm like, you guys should all be better than me. Like, what the foundation that he put down was to see people get better. And I know that I've seen him, be proud of your students, which are his grand students, which could almost technically be his great grand students, because your students are teaching those.
Yes,
it's
definitely.
Crazy, but I love that concept of this joy that you get from watching your students get really good and actually get even better than you at certain things. We're like, wow. We look at some students, we're like, look at this kid is like riding horse dance, or it was amazing, right? Or
yes.
they do.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
I have to say, if I were 20, I probably would have felt differently, right? Because I'd be more competitive and I'm still like so physically capable, quote unquote, right? In this decade of my life, even the last decade of my life, I think because of the way my father taught me I think I would say the same thing. Like, you guys your bar should not be this. So your bar needs to be way higher for yourself. And it doesn't mean, that means you have to kick higher.
Right.
It doesn't mean, that means you have to fly higher. It's just, you should be better, whatever that means for you. And you have to actually interpret that for yourself and what that means too, right? Because for a long time, my dad saying, I got to be better than him, I was like, well, my Tom Tuis are never going to be the way that he's able to do them. My body's very different. And I think I took that as my Kung Fu only needs to be better, right? And versus, okay, I need to take the Wah Lum system to a place that is something that he couldn't do, right? Or I need to take the gifts I have, which is why I did that Jiao episode, and the healing part, right? Which is the medicinal. I am just learning about that now, and made my first batch of Jiao and everything like that with him, and learned that part of it. But for me, I analogize it to, wow, I happen to really be passionate about social justice and helping others, not just in their martial arts journey, but in whatever way I can. And so how can I be better, right? And I think it's so great because it's such an amazing thing where it's like, you got to be better than me. And I think I always took it so literal in just the Kung Fu. And I feel like, no, it should be what that really means for you and what your personal martial journey is. Because as a martial artist, it's not just the kicking and punching. It's actually the secondary to all the things that you should be learning as a martial artist, which Wah Lum practitioners should know because we say it every day, right? At the altar, we say it every day. And those are the things like respect and patience and control and kindness and fellowship and that hard work and all of the things that we're principled as who we are. And so I feel like it took me a very long time to figure that out for myself. And I would say to any martial artist that's kind of learning now and trying to figure it out, when we say, you need to be better than us, yes, we do mean because you are younger and more physically capable, you should be able to do some of these skills. But I think digging a little bit deeper and knowing as a traditional Chinese martial artist, our expectation is for you to actually find what that means for your personal journey.
Yeah, and when it comes to things like your parents, right? Not your parents, I'm talking about parents in general, like where they do everything for their children to provide the best life. A lot of the lessons you learn is not just like, wow, I need to do all these things like my parents did, but also you get lessons, and I'm sure that our students get lessons of like, oh, what that person just did, I love them, but that's a lesson on what not to do.
Yeah.
Right? And we've learned that lesson with our elders, and I'm sure that we've done things in a certain way, which was probably not the best way to do it. But hopefully the environment is that the student can look at it and go, okay, well, that's one way that I won't do it. Still love them, but then they do this other thing. Okay, now that I will take. And and we hope that gets there. There's something else that I heard where it was a magician speaking, but he was talking about art in general, like if you want to be an artist. And he said, if you want to be an artist, you should consume art, you should create art, and you should critique art. And I think it's the same with Kung Fu or learning in general. Like we'll take Kung Fu or the martial arts as like, okay, you consume it, however it is, by watching it, whatever. And then you create it by you participating in it. And then you critique it, maybe as a teacher or however you learn. But I think it's a nice template to think about for being good at something.
Yeah.
That you're working towards.
That's really well described. Just like simple, complicated, simple.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think those are all really great tools. And it's just a reminder on how complicated learning can be. That it isn't easy. It may be simple, but it's not easy. And I think we'll leave it there today. I think that was really insightful. So thank you for sharing all the questions and always doing so much reading and listening, because it sparks really interesting conversations.
It's my pleasure.
All right. Until next time, we got the Miosk episodes, and hopefully you all are subscribed to this podcast. Some of you watching us on YouTube doing some random stretches here, but those of you who are on audio would love it if you would also please leave a little review, because I started to read them the other day, and honestly, I got a little bit emotional. I was really, really moved, and I wish I had planned a little bit better to read a couple of them, or if you want to go to the Apple one is the one that I see. And I was just really moved by the fact that some of you have taken the time to go onto a thing, write a really nice thing that it sounded very genuine. So thank you for that. And that this podcast has been impacting or entertaining, or that you could learn from, or however or whatever reason helps you fall asleep. Yeah. I hope that's not the case. I don't think I could fall asleep to my voice, but I definitely am very, very grateful for all of you who have been supportive thus far. I'm in year 7 and I just can't even believe it. And so thank you for listening. I did a little research, and some of these podcast episodes are in like the top 5%, sometimes 10%, but often the top 5% of all podcasts. And that's kind of remarkable because there's a lot of them out there, which just goes to show how grateful I am that people still want to hear what we have to say, and the guests that I've had on, I'm so grateful for. And for my Patreons, wow. Some of you are literally supporting this podcast, but also the work that I do. So I just want to say thank you so, so very much. So until next time.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at SifuMimiChan on Instagram or Facebook.